Journalist. And on my right we have Daniel Balena, who is very own Arts TV and an international relations expert. So first of all, I'm going to jump straight into the question for Jeff. From recent media appearances and social media activity, one can determine that you are a big advocate for Ethiopia and Ethiopians. Recently you've been involved with some investigative journalism, going to some areas of conflict, most notably Maikadra and in the Dessie-Wollo front. Can you tell me a bit about what you observed there? And then after we're going to talk a little bit about how what you observed might be, how that can be compared to how other Western media outlets have covered it.
Well, first of all, the thing is, this is a country at war, but people get the wrong impression of a war, as if, my gosh, there should be bombs and shelling going off all the time, and it's not like that, of course. To a great extent, the war is something that's happening elsewhere. It's out there, and so it's easy for, say, Western media to portray it as some kind of panicking situation where things are going nuts, where there are atrocities happening all the time. My gosh, something has to happen. And it's not as cut and dried as that. It's more nuanced. If you go up all the way to the region where I was in Maikadra, I was privileged to be part of the interview team to talk to survivors of the Maikadra massacre. These people are traumatized. There's scores of them. And they will tell their stories. And their stories are being, to a certain extent, largely misrepresented. I was privileged to work with the fine journalists of Arts TV to go down to the Wollo area where Arts TV helped. We worked together to produce the segment on internally displaced persons in Dessie. You have 100,000 people in that Dessie area who are IDPs. More than 70 NGOs are supposedly working, or they're estimated to be working, in the Tigray region. Well, what about these people down in Dessie? You can go right into the city of Dessie and find 2 IDP camps where these people need food, need 3 square meals a day, need shelter. At one point, I believe a coordinator said, well, one NGO gave them 50 beds. It's 100,000 people. That's not going to go very far. So the problem is the situation is being presented as Tigray and Ethiopia. Tigray is part of Ethiopia. Tigrayans are Ethiopians. And I can talk about something that's a pertinent fact a little bit later. But what I'm seeing and what I'm observing is a starkly different reality than what is being portrayed, at least in the Western media.
Specifically, how would you characterize the way that Western media, such as BBC or CNN, how are they portraying it that you saw differently when you were there?
Well, okay, let's start with a facile example, but it works. Nima Elberger of CNN goes up with her team to a checkpoint, and they have their covert camera. That was her term. And she gets out of the car and goes, CNN, CNN. Now, as I mentioned just before we did this program, Daniel McConan of Arts TV and I are in a car, and we go through 20 checkpoints to get to the Dessie area. You would be absolutely mad to get out of a car facing military personnel with rifles. Why would you? And to me, that strikes me as a very cynical attempt to provoke an episode of drama for the sake of the camera. All you had to do was sit on your butt and have your fixers and your other people talk to the staff and say, hi, we're here on behalf of the CNN team. We're supposed to have an interview with ex-military official, blah. What is this nonsense where you get out of the car and go, CNN, CNN? The soldiers are very tense. Oh, give me a break. I went through this. We had, at one point, soldiers wanting to check and search our vehicle. And they decide not to because they went, okay, it's Arts TV, it's Jeff Pierce, they happen to have heard of me, they went, okay, on you go, and we were very privileged. We went and obtained the proper permissions to do this. It's night and day in terms of the reaction. As an example I cited before, Declan Walsh, Finbar O'Reilly do a front page story on the Tigray situation. And of course, the incestuous circle of self-referential media go, good job, fantastic, excellent. A couple of days pass, and then it sinks in, hey, you took photos of child soldiers. Those are children with rifles, which is against international law and decency and just plain damn common sense. What the hell are you doing sensationalizing this and making this into some kind of mythic sort of heroic image of children with rifles? I find it contemptible. And then, of course, we got the pushback from certain advocates on behalf of the TPLF position who said, well, what else can they do? Children have to, these girls could be raped, therefore if they're old enough to be raped, they're old enough to hold rifles. It's not an either-or proposition. They're children. It's against international law, plain and simple. So we're seeing that where a different kind of morality is being offered for Africa as opposed to what we have in the West. Nobody would dare do that if this was, say, the Balkans War or the European conflict in the West. Nobody would think twice about that. So, sorry, it makes me extremely angry when I think about these things.
So we've heard Jeff say that in general the Western media's had an anti-Ethiopian bias. How do you think that they've reached that position? What is their motive for having this so-called anti-Ethiopian bias?
Okay, so it's a little bit tricky question. Anyway, you're not trying to trick me, but it's very hard to actually pinpoint one specific thing that makes them so biased, so jaundiced. Their eyes are covered from the reality. Personally, I think there must be 4 reasons for that, primarily. One is ignorance. Ignorance, total ignorance about Ethiopia and this oldest African civilization with an uninterrupted history of independence. They don't know, most of them. When I really think about it, the other day Al Jazeera was referring to Abiy Ahmed as president of Ethiopia. Like, it was just out there. Yeah. They don't even know that basic principle of referring to a country there. It's fundamental political system that we have set up here. The first thing you would think to know is how the system works. You don't even know who the head of state is. You don't even know how to address him. And then you have some experts coming out telling you about the fabric of the socio-economic existence of the country. I wonder how many of them actually know what this country is all about. So it starts from there. That's one reason. As you said, that CNN journalist. Making it so dramatic, I bet you if you ask her anything significant about Ethiopia or anything factual, I bet you she wouldn't know that we are the oldest civilization in Africa. I bet you would think that Ethiopia has been a colony of probably one European country. So one of the primary reasons for me is that they don't know much about the country. It starts from there. The other point is lobbying and exorbitant payment for people who are embedded in different international news outlets, organizations like CNN, BBC, whatever. You pay and they bark on behalf of the other side, whoever is against Ethiopia. So it's about payment and lobbying and the long years of preparation from the other side for a time like this. Sometimes it amazes me, There are people embedded in there, and then they were waiting for the right moment, and then they come up. Sometimes it confuses me. Like, how could you be so ignorant? How could you be so blind to the actual situation down there? The next one is perpetuation of news conflicts. I don't know if it was you, Jeff, who was or somebody else told me that she was talking to this international journalist in Liberia and asked him, who is fighting who? And he goes, who cares? As long as it is in Africa, as long as someone fights somebody else.
The anecdote is it had to do with Sierra Leone.
Sierra Leone.
I was back working for a...
You were the one who told me?
Yeah, I'm the one who told you. I was working for 3 miserable months for a certain high-profile network in London, and it was a story on Sierra Leone. And of course, it was about conflict diamonds, the real root of the problem. But the thing is, nobody really... conflict diamonds wasn't quite on the radar yet. And I had read about it, and I went, oh, I want to put this into the cause of the story. And the video editor screwed up the series of shots, so the story didn't make sense. So of course the producer afterwards said, what the hell was that? And I said, I want to explain why things were. And he said words which I have repeated many times and which have stuck with me. He said, I don't care why the Africans are fighting. Just show the Africans fighting. And that's the way they treat.
Thank you so much. I mean, I'm very happy that it was you who I heard it from. I wouldn't have put it that way, but I have the idea. That is so incredible. That's how it is. They need to create news. Yeah. It has to be in Africa. But it has been between us. Also.
Sure, but just to pick up on one thing, sure, the Western journalists are being paid.
Yeah.
Of course they are.
No doubt about it.
They want to get a news story. Mm-hmm. They're coming to Ethiopia. Let's face it, there is a lot of news at the moment in Ethiopia, so it's fertile ground for them. But that doesn't necessarily explain why they take the what you're describing as the anti-Ethiopian or anti-Prosperity Party line rather than the anti-TPLF. Sure, they need some news, they could get it anywhere. Why are they going, in your words, the pro-TPLF and anti-government?
Preferably, Peter, I wouldn't characterize it as what party was that? Prosperity. I mean, it doesn't have anything to do with that. I wouldn't want anything to do with that. It's anti-Ethiopian, regardless, whatever kind of government it may be. I don't even think they know the name of the party if there was one. Forget about it. And so it's about the nation. Yeah. You are cursed when you have a nationalist leader, as the saying goes, in one part of Ethiopia. They don't want to make the same mistake that they did with probably Mao. You know, they never thought that they would revolutionize that big country. What won China, what transformed China was the national sentiment. It's not that Mao was a Democrat. He was an evil communist. He killed probably about 70 million people, but he was a national leader. So they don't want to make that kind of mistake again. They were doing it with Taiwan when the mainland China was being run by a nationalist leader. So when you think about bringing some kind of national sentiment, especially in the Horn of Africa, that's danger for some people, for some governments, for some agencies, aid or otherwise. So that's why if this country comes out to become a formidable voice in the Horn of Africa, it would eventually become a voice for Africa. And it has all the potentials. Like in every sense of the word, we have the potentials to become one. They don't want anybody like that here. I wouldn't be blaming them because it's all about interests.
No, the thing is, the way the question is phrased is very astute, but it also, we can answer it another way. You're British, I'm Canadian. In our societies, we think that we've evolved to an appreciation of the rights of minorities. We've come a certain way. So in Britain, for instance, we're starting to recognize, hey, black people should be treated as equal citizens under the law and should have access to jobs, blah, blah, blah. What about South Asians, blah, blah, blah. In Canada, we pat ourselves on the back to a large extent in how we are trying to treat minorities better and recognize their rights and so forth. So what we do is we export our values over to when we look through a lens at other countries and we go, okay, how do these people treat their minorities? In the Ethiopian-Tigray conflict, there was one phrasing in a story by someone who should know better, who literally said the classic underdog of the TPLF. The classic underdog ran this country for 27 years. Who's the underdog here? So right away, there's no familiarity with the background dynamics of the situation. Yes, Tigrayans make up 6% of the population. And what's moreover, the people are conflated with a terrorist organization. This is the equivalent to saying that ISIS represents all Muslims in Mosul when they were holding that city miles away from Erbil. And I was there for a very brief moment. I saw what was going on there in a very, very brief window. So it's ridiculous to say, well, you know, Tigrayans are equivalent to the TPLF, or even to say TDF, the Tigray Defense Force. There is no such thing as the Tigray Defense Force. It didn't exist because by its very nature, that says, oh, it's an independent state. Well, before you get to that point, let's examine how these people are actually running the region after the ceasefire. Well, they slaughtered more than 50 50 administrators in the region, and they went on to steal, as the latest headlines go. They're looting in terms of aid packages and so forth.
So just to pick up on something that Daniel mentioned and address it to Jeff. So, I mean, and I've heard you mention in the past that the Western media have been ignoring Ethiopian voices.
Yep.
So in this current time, who are the Ethiopian voices that you're referring to? Are they Amhara? Are they Oromo? Are they Somali, Goragi? How do you somehow bring all of those voices together and characterize them as Ethiopian right now?
Yeah, but not to pick on your question. I understand the phrasing of the question, but let's examine the phrasing of the question itself. You're automatically dividing the voices into, well, it must be categories of ethnicity. I was talking to a young man who is an activist who is Tigrayan last night. I hope to do an article on him soon. And he is virulently anti-TPLF. And he is part of an organization that's growing that has thousands of people who believe in Ethiopia and want to not only protect Tigrayans who might be unintentionally arrested, but also support the government in its effort. So there's a voice. So the thing is, now, do you want to call him Tigrayan or Ethiopian? And his phrasing, I hope I'm quoting him correctly, he said, I'm Ethiopian and Tigrayan. You know, this is why I'm doing this. And this fellow has had his life threatened to the point where the authorities actually gave him numbers to call in case he sees a threat. And yeah, in case he sees a threat. So the thing is, we're artificially dividing these people along these categories. I'm not saying that there's not those ethnic dynamics and tensions within the country. The Ethiopians can speak that way better than a Ferengi can. But, you know, the voices, when I say the voices are getting marginalized, I've given this example before. There's a Deutsche Welle story early into the conflict, maybe around December or January. Who did they quote? They quoted Kettle Tronville, they quoted William Davidson, they quoted Michaela Wrong. Not one Ethiopian was quoted, not one Eritrean was quoted, and the story was all about Ethiopia and Tigray. How do you do that? How do you write a story where you don't even quote the very people from the country that you're talking about? And we see this again and again. Why is it that Tronville is on virtually every video commentary piece early on in the conflict? Somebody actually did the numbers of how often, and I don't recall them at the time, but Davison, Tronville, Alex de Waal are the go-to people to comment. Why? Why is it there are so few opportunities? I've only seen Ambassador Hennick on one show. On France. What was it?
France
24?
Yeah, France 24.
France 24.
France 24.
Why is it that Asfa Wosan Asarate one of the greatest diaspora writers from Ethiopia ever. Incredibly eloquent gentleman, brilliant. I've only seen one interview with him. Why is it that I've seen maybe one or two interviews with Naman Zelike, who is leading the charge out there? Why is it that they come to people who look like you and me? And I can tell you why. Because they're black. And because the default reasoning is, well, they can't possibly be impartial about their own country.
Well, they are not impartial. The other guys that you talked about, we're not impartial at all.
No, we're not impartial.
How could Alex Duval be impartial?
Yeah, exactly.
For heaven's sake.
They're not impartial either. But
yeah.
the thing is, they're somehow the default authorities on an African nation. And just to put this in here, I have to confront the irony every time I answer this question, because people say, well, you're the white guy. 2 diaspora organizations raised funds to send me here to investigate and see what I could find, and take a partisan Ethiopian position because we didn't see it being recognized and given the proper space to reply. And I said, well, wouldn't you want one of your own? My gosh, I don't speak the language. I'm not, yeah, I wrote a book, but big deal. And they said, they won't listen to us. Those are their exact words. They won't listen to us. Which is why the white guy is here talking about this instead of one of their own. And that's appalling.
But
that's terrible.
If I may, Peter, here, just a little bit.
Yeah.
On top of that, what I think is we haven't been able to provide the forum, the platform for Ethiopians to express themselves, to defend the purpose. As I have told you, Peter, yesterday, that we are planning to set up this Horn of African Digest program, whereby we'll invite international and national experts, like what that guy said, Asfa Wassan or something.
Yeah, Asfa Wassan.
You know, if he impresses you that much, I think I know about him as well.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons is not that we cannot be biased or we are black. It's also because we have to admit our weaknesses. We haven't provided the platform. So this is a beginning. We are going to provide a platform for intellectuals from Africa and Ethiopia to defend the purposes that we are working to achieve.
But that raises a question. So why do you think that platform hasn't been provided, or it hasn't been built by itself?
It's a very difficult question, Pete, honestly. Why it is not until now, I don't know. It's an undeniable weakness on our side, on the Ethiopian side. I don't know if you have heard, for instance, some bunch of anti-Ethiopian elements were trying to convince the American Congress to remove Ethiopia from the AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunities Act, which lets Ethiopian entrepreneurs to export their products to the United States without tariff. And they were actually trying to push the US government. They were writing letters, petitions, and stuff like that. And then there were other Ethiopian professionals who were trying to counterbalance that. What was the result then? A couple of days ago, the US Treasury Department said that they are considering removing Ethiopia from the Growth and Opportunity Act. So you can see how those anti-Ethiopian elements have gaining the upper hand to some extent, because we haven't been able to fight or counterbalance it with the same strength and commitment to the others. But lately, yesterday, I don't know if you have heard, this Ethiopian Scholars Association or group have issued a statement, a brilliant statement, rebutting some statement African intellectuals have issued regarding the conflict in the northern part of Ethiopia, which actually was extremely lopsided and biased, but it was from African intellectuals. But you should see the response by these Ethiopian intellectuals. It was so brilliantly composed, and it's creating a momentum now. So that's the kind of works, the kind of involvements that the intellectuals should be getting themselves into. One of them being a forum like this. a platform like the one that we had last week.
Yeah, do you see that process as creating more of a unified understanding, or do you see it more as sort of creating more of a kind of binary, polarized position for both of those groups that you were just talking
Well,
about?
I mean, in a way, sometimes I consider this probably as a blessing in disguise. I don't think Ethiopians have become so united for as long as I remember, honestly, to the extent that they are now. That's a very good sign. That's why I don't give up on the whole situation. One of the prominent guys from the terrorist labeled organization TPLF was saying the other day, how could you fight with the entire Ethiopian people? That's what he said.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
sorry.
I just did laugh as
Yeah.
well. How could you
What a
fight
question.
with the entire Ethiopian people? You can't. It may take some time. There would be some ups and downs here and there, hiccups, but eventually the larger people with the more sane motive would win. I mean, there is no question about that. So that's how I think the balance would ultimately shift significantly.
Okay. It was something I wanted to ask Jeff. So, I mean, I've heard in the past, I saw an interview, I think, where in the past you said that Ethiopian people in times of crisis have come together. So the Battle of Adwa, I think you mentioned, in 1941 with the Patriots and resistance. I mean, would you characterize what is happening now in Ethiopia as a similar circumstance as that? I mean, I think a lot of people would say the opposite, so I'm interested to hear your views.
Well, I've got to be careful here because it's harder to assess. I mean, what Daniel mentioned in terms of the forums and other things is, it's not my place to point out the faults of a people, and it would be arrogant for me to do so. What is interesting is out of a natural good nature, always expected, I think they waited patiently for the United States and for the UN to wake up. And they thought, eventually the facts will come to light and they'll snap out of it. And they'll realize, no, this is nonsense and that we're dealing with a terrorist group, and it hasn't happened. And so you look at it, that's why the views are not, there was not enough preparation at the same time as the incredible machine of lobbying and media manipulation on the part of the TPLF. It's mind-boggling the extent that it goes. When it comes to the unity of the people, consider that in 1896, in terms of the Battle of Adwa, Menelik had to go around, and he pretty much did the tour. He went to other peoples. He went to, I think, the Afar people and said, I believe the quote of Raymond Jonas's great book, The Battle of Adwa, he says, I am black, you are black. Let us go out and fight the common enemy who is coming to invade us. And they went to other peoples, and he made the rounds. And Baratieri showed up with 20,000 people and announced he was going to bring Menelik back to Rome in a cage. And Menelik showed up with 100,000 guys. Had, by the way, Ras Alula there, the most famous, perhaps I would say, the most famous general warrior,
instrumental,
who was in Tigray, fighting side by side with Ras Makonnen. Wanted to prove himself so much that he threw himself into the battle so strenuously that Alula had to hold him back and say, okay, that's enough. Amazing examples. There's Empress Taitu busy rallying the people. And then you cut to 1941. Where, yes, in the liberation, it's always been my argument in my book, contrary to all the other historians who say, well, who liberated Ethiopia? It was the Ethiopian people themselves that wore down the Italian occupation force. Which, by the way, again, why is it in history we call it the French occupation? But previous historians called it the conquest of Ethiopia. There was no conquest of Ethiopia. They occupied half the country, just the same as they occupied, say, half the country in Poland. These people come together in a moment in crisis and say, holy crap, the invaders are coming. Look, put that down. We can figure this out later. Let's just rise to the moment. And this is what they're doing now. Is It's very hard to measure that, though. But I think if you talk to ordinary people, not just in Addis, because of course, like any metropolis, you're going to get a metropolis perspective. But if you go out into the country, if you go out into other areas, they're coming together. I was in Desi, and the flip side of it is there's a certain degree of anti-Ferengi feeling. That's quite understandable, because consider how they're being, knocked on and bashed around, and it's the city of Desi that is rising to support the 100,000 IDPs. They listen to the radio out there in the farms, and they're going, what is wrong with the world? Why are they doing this to us? I literally have people saying, why are they doing this to us? What have we done? We've been your ally for like years. They don't understand this. So the flip side of this is, imagine if ISIS had a lobby group in Washington, D.C. and could say, we're so hard put upon, we're treated so poorly. Yes, you're also holding a region hostage, you're slaughtering administrators, you attacked army bases in the night. Gee, I wonder why the state is angry with you. Why are we looking at things through that perspective? Flip it. Let's look at it from the Ethiopian perspective.
Yeah, from the other side.
From the other side.
Okay.
But then, so 125 years on from the Battle of Adwa,
Yep.
you have social media.
Yep.
And I think all of us, people watching this program, if you spend 5 minutes looking at Twitter and what's happening in the Ethiopian context, I don't know, for me it's difficult to characterize that as a unified voice. If anything, it's some really, really angry people in no way wanting to unify with other voices that they're hearing about the same subject.
The flaw in your reasoning is that you're assuming that every voice has equal weight. What about the Twitter campaigns for which the same voices come on again and again and again and again in a relentless campaign, sometimes digitally organized? Now, to be fair, I've had my own words quoted back and little snippets of what I do taken, and somebody who thinks they're doing us all a favor organize it with proxy accounts where it's the exact same stupid wording, and I look at it and I try to tell these people, please don't do this, it's moronic, it doesn't achieve anything, don't do it, is the tactic of the enemy. So you're assuming that every voice has equal weight, and these are genuine individuals. Some of them are fake accounts, they're bots. So the thing is,
that's one.
Yeah.
That's one, but it's an excellent question, honestly. I mean, because if you actually make that a litmus paper on to measure or to analyze the level of unity or disunity, for that matter, I think it would be wrong. But if you base it on if you base your analysis on what you see there, it's scary. You're right. It doesn't show any unity. But how many are these people? The weight, that's true. You have to consider the weight as well. As I was telling you before we started this session, there is no fake news. There is only digital illiteracy. Most people are digitally illiterate. So those who are literate enough are very few, but they are very loud. You see them on Twitter, for instance, a lot, and they say so many venomous things, not to mention the enemy purposely organizing a very large, what do you call it, battalion of digital warmongers. They sit there, they have their computers, the internet connection, as you know, has never been better, even while we are in this kind of situation, so they play the game. So you see there, one person gives you exactly diametrically opposite perspectives of the same topic from two different accounts. That's a digital warfare.
Yeah. I mean, again, to carry on, so on November the 4th, 2020, the telecommunications, the internet was effectively turned off in the north of the country, in Tigray, creating an information sort of vacuum. How do you think that has influenced media coverage, social media coverage of the
situation out there?
Yeah, of the ongoing conflict. I mean, it certainly wouldn't benefit their cause.
But it was fixed. It was fixed. It was being fixed. The airport has been fixed. The telecommunications have almost 90% reinstalled. Electricity, some extent water, everything was getting back to normal.
Oh, and don't forget,
Those
Dr.
requires
Gedian, the
happening now.
Attorney General of the country, pointed out that repeatedly they murdered and attacked the utility workers who were
Exactly.
trying to repair the thing. So, I mean...
The telecommunications
yeah.
and Ethiopian Electric Lights Authority technicians have been slaughtered. I mean, how could you possibly expect anything to work with that kind of cruelty? But to getting back to the core of your question, it's not that there is no telecommunications on internet, that there is fake news or there is wrong and false news. It's not because they couldn't get anything out of that. They do. Haven't you seen their foul-mouthed spokesperson, whatever
Which
his name
one?
may be? I don't know, but he was standing to the World Food Program Ethiopia representative. I don't even remember who he was, but he was giving him his satellite phone to spew whatever venom that he may have.
Yeah.
So, I mean, telecommunication lines on or not,
Wasn't
there
that
hasn't been
Getachew Reda?
anything, you know?
Wasn't that Getachew Reda with a
I
satellite
think
phone borrowed from the...
Yeah, I think he was.
Do you think it's fair to say that on both sides of the conflict there has been some unverified messages put out on social media?
Yes, there is no doubt about that.
Yeah.
We have been, Daniel, that guy who went, our staff who went with you, he was telling me that there was this guy who called from, what was the name of the place? Gaint.
Yeah.
He is in Gaint, making a phone call to Addis and asking, is it true that Gaint has been captured by TPLF?
Yeah.
He is in Gaint. He's sitting in the city and asking if that city was captured. Because this disinformation campaign has been that they say we have captured Desse, for instance, or Woldia, or what was the name again? Gaint. These cities, they claim that they have, because it's the disinformation is working to some extent. Because people, without knowing that there is nothing coming, they just run away. They start packing their stuff and leave. And then some few soldiers or whatever, fighters, get in there, take a snapshot, and say that I took this at the government office, in front of the government office, so we are there. That means that we are there, but they are not.
From a tactical standpoint, it's brilliant.
It is.
But it's evil.
It's
the
it
terror
is.
in terrorism. I mean,
Yeah.
it's incredibly clever. They did this supposedly in Lalibela, where they went to Lalibela, hung out, caused a bit of damage, and then they left. Or it was retaken back to a certain extent. Yeah, but they never really captured Lalibela because there's nothing really tactically useful there. Why would you take Lalibela? To what extent? What's there for you to capture?
Yeah, that's for another program. I mean, a phrase of yours was that you've mentioned there's been a tsunami of one-sided reporting on the current situation. I mean, to move this discussion forward, how would you like to see, what should be in place to rebalance that tsunami? Or what would you like to see to rebalance the coverage of the situation? What should be put in place?
That's a long Christmas list. First of all, the top players who are setting the narrative agenda, from Declan Walsh to Cara Anna Cara, I apologize because I keep flipping it and I can't remember, to all of the others, have to come out and apologize after realizing they've been taken for a ride. They've been utterly suckered. As an example, Cara Anna Cara of AP is the one who muddied the waters over the Maikadra massacre. And claimed, oh, it was actually reprisals. And then Reuters later did a story claiming that it was both sides that did it. I see very little evidence of that. The AP ran a story about, oh, Tigrayans are being taken off their identity cards. Well, the Ethiopians I speak to, they would love to get rid of identity cards. It's the equivalent of apartheid, walking around with your ethnicity on an ID card. The first thing you'd want is to take the ethnicity off your ID card. It's ridiculous.
It is taken away.
And it's demeaning. Yeah, it's demeaning, it's disgraceful, it needs to go. So to actually be so warped as to report that this is a virtue that you have your ethnicity on an ID card is just reprehensible. So getting back to your question, the Western media has to realize, hey, we got suckered. Now, I've said this example before. Michaela Wrong just came out with a new book called Do Not Disturb about Rwanda, which I have to tuck into as soon as I get home. And she says, yeah, I was fooled. I'm paraphrasing here. I can't remember her exact phrasing. I regret some of the things that I reported because I was misled. That was a courageous stand for her to do so, to say, hey, we need that from the Western media right now. We need to go to the voices that are being overlooked. Why is it that nobody's doing a story and speaking to the activists I spoke to last night saying, here's a Tigrayan who's one part of a thousands plus movement of Tigrayans who do not like the TPLF, think they're evil, and he uses the word evil, and want to support the government. Why don't we see that? Why don't we see the coverage in terms of, there was one crew, French crew I believe, who came to Desi to report on the IDPs. I haven't heard of any others. We were there, Arts TV was there. Why aren't they covering that? Why is it so late in terms of getting to the fact of, hey, the TPLF are looting stuff, the aid packages? Why is it that not one Western media operation looked into my investigation in terms of how UN senior officials were actually helping the TPLF in Mekelle undermine national exams? Why is it that the massacre, the supposed massacre of Axum, is still talked about as if it exists? I have video that shows people walking around a day after there was supposedly blood in the streets. Now the thing is, you can claim doctored video all you like. The problem is that the video was uploaded to YouTube December 4th. Weeks later were the accusations of a massacre. And let's not forget, Debretsion Gebremichael said that he took Axum, TPLF took Axum on the very date that they say a massacre occurred. So as I've said many times, he's either lying then or he's lying now. And you know what I get when I point out these facts? Complete silence. They don't respond. And I've got the video waiting. You can see it. It's there online. There are the people walking around the church. It's a major church celebration. Who in their right mind would be doing that after a major massacre, including people getting slaughtered in a church?
It occurs to me that, so my question was, how do you rebalance it? You want to avoid getting partisanship just from the other angle. You want a more of a unified understanding of what's going on and not just two sides sort of shouting at one another.
I appreciate what you're saying, but you're assuming that if we take the most easy example, sorry, it's an American example, and we're Canadian-British, but it comes to mind, is back in the McCarthy era, people said, well, we've got to be objective. So they allowed McCarthy to stand up and slander people and say, I've got this piece of paper with so many communists, and that was the wake-up call to American journalism to go, oh my God, we're giving this guy a free ride without a critical reception, without examining what he's doing. Impartial partisan does not mean the same as taking a point of view. You can take a point of view. I have said many times, nobody from the opposite side seems to believe me, but I do not work for the Ethiopian government. I have never been paid by the Ethiopian government. I have my own stern questions which I would ask the Prime Minister if I had a one-on-one interview with him. Questions, hard questions for which I would be very curious about the answer. But that's, you can take a point of view and not be politically partisan. Why is it that during the 7/7 attacks were seen as an attack on London, as an attack on Britain, and all of us, I was there, I was there living in London
were
at the
you?
time. And went, oh my God, this is a terrorist attack. Well, are you going to say, well, we've got to go get the terrorist view over who ripped a bus, in the middle of... We have to go get the Al-Qaeda point of view after they send planes into the towers, and by the way, killed a fair number of Brits along with the Americans. The 3,000 dead that they always talk about on U.S. networks includes a fair number of British citizens and Canadians. Several Canadians and, I can't remember what the count is, British citizens, another, were in the towers. Did they rush out and go, well, Al-Qaeda, give us your
Could you
perspective
give us your
and your
perspective?
program?
Yeah, just to add on, Pete, if I may, just because I didn't want to forget about it, the identity card thing.
Yeah.
Because the day before yesterday, or probably last week, I guess, the United Nations Secretary General said that Ethiopia is in the danger zone of losing its social fabric due to ethnic profiling. Imagine, this is 30 years after Ethiopia having been the only country in the world, the only member of the United Nations for 30 years, who forced citizens, it was compulsory, by the way, to put your ethnicity on your ID card until recently. The last country who tried that was Rwanda. And then we saw what happened there. The United Nations didn't say anything for 30 years, while many people have been screaming off their throats, this is not right. If you see a car being driven by, you could see the plate and you can tell who is driving it. This is sick, has been. The UN today tells us that we are in the danger zone of losing our social fabric due to ethnic profiling. We've been profiled for 30 years, dude. I just wanted to add that.
Sure.
Thank you.
Can you imagine, we're going to look back on these days and people are going to, one of the things that the TPLF trolls on media say, history will, you're out of step with history. And I always reply, you're out of step with sanity. And the thing is, we're going to look back on these days and people are going to be horrified by the idea that you could justify an ID card with an ethnicity. What are you going to do? Say, well, the Nazi regime was justified in having Jews go around with a yellow star. We're going to look back in horror at statements being made justifying child soldiers with rifles. We're going to look back on these times and go, what the hell were they thinking? And I appreciate that we're on the outside. You and I are the Ferengi, and we look at these things from a distance, but the only way you can look at it is from a human perspective of going, okay, what if we were these people? There's a jackass of a former ambassador who worked with the TPLF, and he came out with a tweet saying, the only way for Ethiopia to go is for each, I'm paraphrasing here, it was the essence of saying, each region should have its own ethnic identity. There should be Tigray, there should be an Amhara, there should be Oromo, blah, blah. And I thought to myself, I said, what if you replaced all the nouns, the names of this, with, say, American states? And you said a tweet of, the only way forward for the United States to be peaceful is to have Black America have like Kentucky, and you had Chicanos to have this, and you had whites over here. It would be ludicrous. And yet we expect Africans, Ethiopians to do this along these lines?
It's even more dangerous.
Yeah, maybe to move things on and potentially wrap things up. I don't know if you saw this morning, the BBC had on its Africa page a story, a news item about which specifically identified the TPLF as stealing and looting from a US AID warehouse. Mm-hmm. And it was specifically, it could only be read as anti-TPLF, I suppose, from the BBC perspective. Do you recognise this as a shift, maybe potentially as a rebalancing of the media attention that Ethiopia is getting at the moment?
No, because we're coming full circle back to the very thing that we talked about, where that jackass producers say, just show the Africans fighting. At the end of the day, as I keep saying again and again, a hungry dog has no loyalty. The Western media, by default, will go, here are the underdogs. Oh, wait, the underdogs have morphed into the enemy. Well, they were always the enemy. None of this surprises Ethiopians when they see the news. You have a headline that says, they looted. Well, yeah. That's exactly what Ethiopians expect the TPLF to do. They're a terrorist organization. Why wouldn't they loot? And what's more, it was reported on Ethiopian, probably on Arts TV and other broadcasting outlets, that they were already helping themselves to aid and also getting weapons smuggled in. This is not news.
You know what? Why the BBC said that?
Yeah.
It's because, what was his name? The USA country rep here. Sean Jones, if I remember right. He gave an interview yesterday, and then he said, well, for me, it was even a little bit somewhat cautious when the interviewer asked him, did TPLF, has TPLF been stealing aid from your warehouses?
Made it a question.
He asked him, and he said, do you believe? The question was, do you believe TPLF has been stealing aid from your warehouses? And he goes, I believe TPLF could be opportunistic. That was not the question. Did they steal or did they not?
Yeah.
So BBC didn't have any other option than reporting this, because as the interview went on, he said that TPLF fighters have been looting warehouses. He actually said it later on in the interview. So the BBC reported it, and the interviewer asked him, so why have you been so silent when the Ethiopian government was saying that TPLF soldiers are using your own USA resources for fighters? He said, we are not in the habit, the US government is not in the habit of releasing statements for everything until we finally find out it is true or not. And then it was finally found out to be true. So that's why BBC reported it. There is no paradigm shift in this.
No. Sure, but it doesn't leave a lot of space for the media, Western media, to move into. If there's bad feeling about them not reporting the full story, and then they do start reporting the full story, then what are they meant to do?
It could be. It could possibly be. It's good for us if they, as Jeff rightly says, his catchphrase, and a hungry dog doesn't know loyalty, doesn't have loyalty. They could completely shift to the other side overnight. Especially like when you have something irrefutable like that. Soldiers captivated with a handful of US aid labeled bags. They said nothing, and now they admitted it only yesterday, and BBC reported it tomorrow. I mean the next day, which is this morning, I guess. So I don't feel comfortable about that. I mean, I don't dwell on it because it could change anytime. I don't feel so ecstatic about it.
And consider the source. The BBC is the same. It's the BBC. They're the same huge media brand that published at least 2 pieces by Alex de Waal, one of which was this hagiographical, nauseating obituary of a known TPLF general, I believe, who we later...
He's alive, though.
Sorry?
Yes, he's alive. He's not a obituary.
I'm sorry. I'm confusing that with his previous... this is the same major media brand which publishes Alex de Waal. Alex de Waal goes around as pretty much a publicity manager for the TPLF. He's written on another website this nauseating obituary of a TPLF member. He wrote this just puff piece about a TPLF general who I understand from my sources is pretty much regarded by the rest of his contemporaries as incompetent.